Hana Kim pressed her face against the viewing window as the transport ship approached the Galactic Interspecies Academy. The massive station hung in space like a glittering jewel, its silver and blue surfaces catching light from the nearby star. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but seeing it with her own eyes still took her breath away. The academy was huge beyond anything she had imagined. Docking bays stretched across its surface like open mouths, each one bigger than the entire spaceport back on Earth. Ships from dozens of different worlds moved in and out like busy insects. Some were sleek and silver like human vessels. Others were organic and curved like living things, and some seemed to be made of pure light that hurt to look at directly. Hana pulled back from the window and checked her bag one more time. Everything was there. Her clothes, her study materials, her photos from home, and the small stuffed dog her little brother had given her for luck. She was nervous but excited. Earth had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years, and humans were still new to most other species. Being chosen for the academy was a huge honor. The docking process took almost an hour. Hana watched through the window as mechanical arms reached out to grab their ship and pull it into the station. The artificial gravity kicked in with a slight bump that made her stomach flip. Then the doors opened and she got her first real look at alien life. The docking bay was filled with beings she had only seen in pictures before. Tall, scaled creatures that looked like walking lizards moved cargo with ease. Floating jellyfish-like beings drifted through the air, their bodies glowing soft blue. Insect people with 4 arms and shiny black shells clicked and chittered as they worked, and scattered among them were other humans, looking just as amazed as she felt. A voice over the speakers called out in Universal Standard, the common language all Academy students had to learn. New students report to Registration Hall 7. Follow the blue lights on the floor. Hana grabbed her bag and joined the crowd moving through the corridors. The walls were covered with screens showing information in dozens of different languages and symbol systems. The blue lights led them through passages that curved and branched like the inside of a living thing. Everything was bigger than human scale. The ceilings were high enough for flying species and the corridors wide enough for creatures much larger than humans. Registration Hall 7 was enormous. Hundreds of new students filled the space, and Hana stared in wonder at the diversity. She had studied alien biology, but seeing so many different species in one place was overwhelming. Near the front, a group of crystal beings caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. To her left, a student that looked like a walking tree swayed gently as if moved by an invisible wind. "First time seeing so many aliens?" someone asked behind her. Hana turned to see another human girl about her age with short black hair and a friendly smile. "Is it that obvious?" Hana asked. "I did the same thing when I arrived last year. I'm Jiwon Park, second-year engineering student. Hana Kim. I'm here for xenobiology." Jiwon's eyes widened. "Xenobiology? That's Professor Vextar's department. You're either very brave or very crazy." "Why do you say that?" "Professor Vextar is a saurian, one of those big lizard people. He's brilliant, but he doesn't like humans much. Last year, he made a human student cry during the first week. She transferred to art history." Hana felt a flutter of worry in her stomach. What did he do? He kept asking her questions about human biology that made it sound like we're weak and stupid. Things like why we need so much sleep, why we get emotional, why we're not specialized for any particular environment. He has this theory that humans only got into the galactic community because we're good at making friends, not because we're actually intelligent. Before Hana could respond, the lights dimmed and a hologram appeared at the front of the hall. It showed a tall, official-looking being with blue skin and 4 arms. "Welcome, students, to the Galactic Interspecies Academy," the hologram said. "You represent the best and brightest of your species. Here you will learn not just facts and skills, but how to work together across the vast diversity of galactic life." The speech continued for several more minutes, covering rules and expectations. Hana tried to pay attention but found herself studying the other students instead. She noticed that most species seemed to group together with their own kind. The crystal beings clustered in one area, the insect people in another. The humans had naturally gathered together too, she realized. After registration, Ji-won offered to show Hana to her dormitory room. They walked through more curved corridors, passing laboratories and classrooms through transparent walls. In one lab, Hana saw students working with plants that glowed and moved on their own. In another, someone was dissecting what looked like a small dragon. "That's the xenobiology wing," Ji-won said, noticing where Hana was looking. "You'll be spending a lot of time there. Professor Vextar runs the most advanced program in the galaxy. Students come from everywhere to study under him, even if he is difficult." Hana's room was small but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and storage units built into the walls. The window looked out onto space, showing the slow rotation of stars as the station turned. Her roommate hadn't arrived yet, but there was a name on the other bed, Mira Choi, also from Earth. "Another human," Ji-won noted. "That's unusual. They usually mix species for roommates." "Maybe there are more human students this year. Maybe. Or maybe Professor Vextar requested it. Some professors think humans work better when they're grouped together." Hana wasn't sure if that was meant to be insulting or helpful. She began unpacking her things, placing her photos on the desk and her clothes in the storage units. The stuffed dog went on her pillow. "Cute," Ji-won said, pointing to the Allah. "What's its name?" "Lucky. My brother gave it to me when I left Earth. He said it would keep me safe. You might need all the luck you can get in xenobiology. Professor Vextar starts his classes with live specimens. Last semester he brought in a swarm of acid wasps from Kepler-9. Hana tried to imagine facing acid wasps in her first week of VA classes. It was both terrifying and exciting. This was what she had come here for, to study life forms that Earth had never seen, to understand how biology worked on a galactic scale. A chime sounded through the dormitory, followed by an announcement. "All xenobiology students report to Laboratory Complex 5 tomorrow at 800 station time for orientation. Come prepared to learn." Ji-won whistled. "That's Professor Vextar's voice. Good luck, Hana. You're going to need it." After Ji-won left, Hana stood at her window looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, a tiny blue dot that suddenly felt very far away. She touched the glass and wondered if she was really ready for this. The academy was more alien and challenging than she had expected, and she hadn't even met Professor Vextar yet. But she had worked too hard to get here to give up before she even started. Tomorrow would be her first real test as a student at the most prestigious school in the galaxy. Whatever Professor Vextar had planned for them, she would face it with everything she had. The stars wheeled slowly past her window as the station continued its endless rotation, carrying her toward whatever came next. Hana arrived at Laboratory Complex 5 with 10 minutes to spare. The corridors here were different from the dormitory section, darker with thick walls and warning lights blinking at regular intervals. Signs in multiple languages warned about dangerous specimens and emergency procedures. She found the classroom easily enough by following the sound of nervous chatter. Inside, about 30 students sat in curved rows, facing a large transparent barrier. Behind the barrier was a space that looked like a small arena with metal walls and bright lights. Monitoring equipment lined the walls, showing readouts that Hana didn't recognize. Most of the students were species she had seen yesterday, but there were a few new ones. A being that looked like living smoke sat in the back corner, occasionally shifting shape. Two students that resembled giant spiders talked quietly in clicks and whistles. Near the front, she spotted 3 other humans, including a boy about her age with kind eyes. "You must be one of the new humans," he said as she sat down nearby. "I'm Kai Lee, 3rd year." "Hana Kim, 1st year. Is it always this tense before class?" Kai looked around at the nervous faces. "Only when Professor Vextar is bringing in something special. Look at the Jakari over there. They're practically vibrating." Hana followed his gaze to the crystal beings Ji-won had pointed out yesterday. They were indeed shimmering more rapidly than usual, which she remembered from her studies, meant they were anxious. "What do you think he's going to show us?" she asked. With Professor Vextar, it could be anything. Last month, he brought in a plant that tried to eat half the class. The month before that, it was some kind of living metal that kept trying to escape. Before Hana could ask more questions, the lights dimmed. A door at the side of the classroom opened and Professor Vextar entered. He was even more impressive in person than in the Academy photos, nearly 8 feet tall with dark green scales that caught the light, and yellow eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His movements were smooth and controlled, like a predator who was completely confident in his environment. "Students," he said, his voice deep and carrying easily through the room. "Today we begin your real education in xenobiology. Until now you have studied pictures and recordings. Today you will observe a living specimen." He touched a control panel and the lights in the arena space dimmed to almost nothing. "The creature you are about to see is called a void stalker. They come from the outer regions of the galaxy, where space is cold and empty. They are apex predators, perfectly adapted for hunting in the void between stars." A chill ran through the classroom. Even the most confident students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Void stalkers possess several unique abilities," Professor Vexistar continued. "They can phase through solid matter at will. They can survive in hard vacuum for extended periods. And most importantly, for our purposes today, they project an aura, a fear so intense that most sentient beings cannot function in their presence." He turned to look at the students, his yellow eyes scanning their faces. "This fear response is not weakness. It is evolution. Every species that has encountered void stalkers and survived did so by running away. Those who did not run are no longer with us." Hana felt her heart start to beat faster. Next to her, Kai had gone very pale. "The specimen we have today was captured 6 months ago after it attacked a mining station in the Vega system. 12 beings died before it was subdued. It has been contained using our most advanced technology. But I want to be clear. You are about to see one of the most dangerous creatures known to science." Professor Vexitar's gaze lingered on the human students. "Some of you may find this experience overwhelming. There is no shame in leaving the classroom if you feel you cannot handle it." None of the students moved, though Hana could see several of them were clearly struggling with the decision. "Very well," Professor Vextar said. He turned back to the control panel and began entering commands. "Initiating specimen transfer. Please remain in your seats and observe carefully." The arena space began to fill with a dark mist. It swirled and thickened until it was impossible to see through. Then, gradually, something began to take shape within it. At first it was just a shadow, darker than the mist around it. Then the mist cleared and Hana got her first look at a void stalker. It was huge, easily 12 feet tall and covered in what looked like black metal skin that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Its shape was roughly humanoid but wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Its arms were too long, its fingers ended in claws that seemed to bend light around them, and its face was a nightmare of too many teeth and eyes like collapsed stars. The fear hit the classroom like a physical wave. Students gasped and recoiled. The spider-like beings made high-pitched keening sounds. The crystal students' light flickered wildly. Several of the smaller species immediately got up and ran for the exit. Hana felt it too, a deep, primitive terror that made her want to hide under her desk and never come out. Her hands shook and her breath came in short gasps, but she didn't run. Something kept her in her seat studying the creature despite her fear. "Observe its movement patterns," Professor Vextar was saying, though his own voice sounded strained. "Notice how it tests the boundaries of its containment. This is intelligence, not mere animal behavior." The void stalker moved around the arena space like liquid shadow. It touched the barriers with its claws, probed the walls, looked up at the ceiling, and all the while, that crushing sense of fear pressed down on everyone in the room. But Hana found herself focusing on details that seemed out of place. The creature favored its left side slightly, as if something on its right was painful. When it moved, there was a hesitation in its step that didn't match the fluid grace of the rest of its movements. And when it looked up at the observation window, she could have sworn she saw something in those dark eyes that looked almost like "Containment breach," someone shouted. Alarms began blaring throughout the complex. The void stalker had stepped through the energy barrier, as if it wasn't there. It stood in the arena, free, looking up at the rows of terrified students. "Impossible," Professor Vexistar breathed. The containment field should hold any known form of matter. But the creature was already moving. It placed its claws against the transparent barrier between the arena and the classroom. The material, which was supposed to be stronger than diamond, began to crack. Students screamed and ran for the exits. The classroom dissolved into chaos as beings of all sizes and shapes trampled over each other in their desperation to escape. Even some of the larger, more confident species were pushing their way toward the doors. Hana started to get up, then stopped. The Void Stalker had broken through the barrier completely now, and was standing in the classroom itself. It was even more terrifying up close. The fear it projected was so intense that several students had collapsed and were crawling toward the exits. But something made Hana stay in her seat. The creature was standing very still, its head turning slowly as it watched the fleeing students. It could have attacked any of them. They were helpless with fear and completely exposed. But it didn't. Instead, it turned and looked directly at her. For a moment that felt like forever, Hana stared into those impossible eyes. She expected to see mindless hunger or alien rage. Instead, she saw something that stopped her cold. The creature looked tired. Not physically tired, something deeper than that. It looked like something that had been running for a very long time and was tired of being afraid. And then, as she watched in amazement, the Void Stalker took a step backward. The alarms were still blaring. Professor Vextar was shouting into his communicator for security teams. The remaining students were pressed against the walls in terror. But in the space between Hana and the creature, something extraordinary was happening. The most dangerous predator in known space had just backed down from a 19-year-old human girl who was shaking so hard she could barely stay in her chair. And neither of them could understand why. Time seemed to stop in the laboratory classroom. The alarms continued their shrieking warning, but they felt distant and unimportant. Professor Vextar's voice shouting commands through his communicator became background noise. Even the sound of fleeing students seemed to fade away. All that mattered was the space between Hana and the Void Stalker. The creature stood perfectly still, its dark star eyes fixed on her face. Up close, Hana could see details that hadn't been visible from her seat. Its black skin wasn't smooth like metal. It had texture like scales or feathers, but made of something that bent light in strange ways. Its breathing was slow and controlled, but she could see the slight rise and fall of its chest. Most importantly, she could see the intelligence behind those terrible eyes. This wasn't a mindless beast driven by instinct. Something was thinking. Behind that alien face, making decisions, trying to understand what was happening just as much as she was. "Don't move," Professor Vextar said quietly. He had stopped shouting into his communicator and was speaking directly to her. "Don't make any sudden movements. Security is on the way." But Hana barely heard him. She was studying the creature's posture, the way it held itself. There was something familiar about it, something that reminded her of. "You're hurt," she said softly. The Void Stalker's head tilted slightly to one side. The movement was so human-like that several of the remaining students gasped. "Hana, what are you doing?" Kai whispered from where he was pressed against the wall near the exit. "Don't talk to it." But Hana couldn't stop herself. Everything about the creature's stance screamed pain and exhaustion to her. She had grown up around animals on her family's small farm outside Seoul. She knew what hurt looked like, whether it was a cow with an injured leg or a dog that had been hit by a transport. "Your right side," she continued, her voice still quiet but growing more confident. "Something's wrong with your right side. That's why you move like that." The creature's eyes narrowed, but not in anger. It looked more like surprise. It glanced, down at its own body, then back at her. Behind them, the classroom door burst open and security officers rushed in. They were a mixed group, humans in protective armor, a saurian with a neural disruptor, and something that looked like a walking crystal formation carrying weapons Hana didn't recognize. "Everyone stay back," the lead officer, a human woman, shouted. "We have containment equipment incoming." The Void Stalker heard them and turned its head toward the new arrivals. Its posture changed immediately. The tiredness disappeared, replaced by the fluid readiness of a predator. The fear aura it projected intensified, and two of the security officers stumbled backward. "Wait," Hana said, louder this time. Just wait. She stood up slowly, her hands visible and empty. The Void Stalker's attention snapped back to her, but it didn't attack. Instead, it watched her with what she could only describe as curiosity. Hana, sit down, Professor Vextar commanded, his voice sharp with panic. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, she replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. I'm talking to someone who's scared and hurt and far from home. The security officer raised her weapon. Miss, step away from the creature immediately. It's extremely dangerous. So are you, Hana pointed out, nodding at the weapons aimed at the Void Stalker. So is everyone in this room. But that doesn't mean we're all monsters. She took a step toward the creature. It tensed, but didn't move. Away. You don't belong here, do you? She asked it. This isn't your kind of place, too bright, too many people, too much noise. The Void Stalker made a sound, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in its chest. It wasn't threatening, though. It sounded almost like agreement. Where are you from? Somewhere dark and quiet? Somewhere you could move without being watched and judged and poked at? Professor Vextar's scales had gone pale, which Hana knew from her studies meant shock in. Saurians, this is impossible, he breathed. Void Stalkers don't communicate. They don't have language structures that match any known species. Maybe nobody ever tried talking to them the right way, Hana suggested. She took another step forward. The creature could have killed her easily. Its claws were longer than her forearms and looked sharp enough to cut through the reinforced walls, but it just watched her approach. My name is Hana, she said. I'm from a world called Earth. It's very far from here, and most of the time I miss it terribly. The rumbling sound came again, softer this time. You miss your home too, don't you? That's why you look so tired. It's hard being the only one of your kind in a place where everyone is afraid of you. Behind her, she heard someone whisper, How is this possible? She thought it might have been Kai, but she didn't turn to check. The Void Stalker lowered itself slowly until it was sitting on the floor. The movement put it closer to Hana's eye level, though it was still much larger than her. Up close, she could see old scars in its dark skin. Not fresh wounds, but marks that had healed long ago. You've been fighting, she observed. Not hunting. Fighting. Someone or something hurt you, and you've been running ever since. The creature's eyes widened slightly. If she hadn't been watching so carefully, she might have missed it. Professor Vextar, she said without turning around. How long ago was this one captured? 6 months, he replied automatically, then seemed to realize what he was doing. Hana, you need to step away from it immediately. This is not safe. 6 months. In a cage, she said to the creature. No wonder you broke out. I would have too. She sat down on the floor, copying the creature's posture. This brought them to almost the same height, and she could see the surprise in its expression. The mining station where they caught you, what were you doing there? Were you hunting the miners, or were you looking for something else? The Void Stalker made a different sound this time, shorter, sharper, almost like frustration. You couldn't tell them what you needed, could you? They saw you and assumed you were there to hurt them. So they fought back, and people got hurt, and now everyone thinks you're a monster. Slowly, carefully, the creature extended one massive claw toward her, not threatening but tentative, like it was asking permission. Hana looked at the claw, black as space, sharp enough to cut through steel, attached to an arm that could crush her without effort. Then she looked into those dark star eyes and saw the question there. She reached out her hand and touched the tip of the claw with her fingertip. The reaction was immediate. The Void Stalker's fear aura disappeared completely. The crushing terror that had been pressing down on the room lifted like fog in sunlight. Students who had been cowering against the walls straightened up in amazement. Impossible. Professor Vexatar whispered again. But Hana wasn't listening to him anymore. She was focused on the creature in front of her, on the way it had leaned, into her touch like a cat seeking affection. On the sound it was making now, not a rumble or a growl, but something almost like a purr. You're not a monster at all, she said softly. You're just lonely. The laboratory had fallen completely silent except for the quiet hum of the air recycling systems. Even the alarms had stopped their shrieking warnings. Everyone in the room, students, security officers, and Professor Vextar, stared in amazement at the impossible scene before them. Hana sat cross-legged on the floor next to a creature that was supposed to be one of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. The Void Stalker had settled into a more relaxed position. Its massive form curved slightly toward her like it was trying to get closer without being threatening. "This is unprecedented," Professor Vextar breathed. His voice was full of wonder and scientific excitement, though he still kept his distance. "In 300 years of recorded contact with Void Stalkers, nothing like this has ever happened. Maybe because nobody ever tried sitting down and having a conversation," Hana suggested. She was still touching the creature's claw, and she could feel a very faint vibration through it, like a heartbeat but slower and deeper than any she had ever felt. The security team leader stepped forward carefully. "Miss, we need to establish a safe perimeter. Even if it's not being aggressive right now, this situation could change at any moment." "Her," Hana corrected automatically. "Not it, her." Everyone in the room looked at her in surprise. "How do you know?" Kai asked from his position near the wall. He had relaxed slightly but was still ready to run if needed. Hana studied the creature's face. It was difficult to read expressions on features so alien, but there was something in the way. She held herself, the way she responded to attention. "I don't know exactly, it's just intuition, I guess. The same way you can sometimes tell with animals." Professor Vextar was frantically making notes on his tablet. "Fascinating. Student Kim appears to have developed some form of empathic connection with the specimen. This could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies communication." The Void Stalker made a low sound that might have been amusement. She turned her head toward Professor Vextar, and he immediately took a step backward. "She doesn't like being called a specimen," Hana said. "Would you like being called a specimen?" "How can you possibly know what she's thinking?" the professor asked. "The same way I know when my dog is happy or sad or scared. Body language, sounds, the way she moves. It's not that different." To demonstrate, Hana moved her hand slightly. The Void Stalker immediately leaned into the touch, making that purring sound again. "Incredible," someone whispered. Hana thought it was one of the crystal students, but she didn't look away from her new friend to check. "What's your name?" she asked the creature softly. "Do your people have names?" The Void Stalker made a series of sounds, some deep and rumbling, others higher-pitched, almost musical. It was clearly language of some kind, but unlike anything Hana had ever heard. "I can't understand that," she admitted. "But it sounds beautiful. Do you mind if I give you a name I can pronounce, just until we figure out how to translate yours?" The creature tilted her head in what looked like agreement. "Nuri," Hana said, after thinking for a moment. "It means light in my language, because even though you look dark, I can see the light in your eyes." Nuri made a pleased sound and touched Hana's hand with the tip of one claw, so gently that it barely made contact. "Professor," Kai said from across the room, "shouldn't we be recording this? This is going to change everything we know about Void Stalkers." "Already recording," Professor Vextar replied, holding up his tablet. "Every second of this encounter is being documented. The Xenobiology department is going to be flooded with research requests." "What about your injury?" Hana asked Nuri. "Can you show me what's wrong?" Nuri hesitated, then slowly shifted position to reveal her right side. There was a section of her dark skin that looked different, rougher with what appeared to be old scar tissue beneath. "Energy weapon burn," the security team leader said immediately. "High-powered military grade. That's going to hurt for a long time, maybe forever." Hana looked up at her. "Is there anything that can help with that kind of injury?" "For a Void Stalker? Nobody's ever tried. We don't know enough about their biology to attempt medical treatment." "But you could learn, right?" Hana pressed. "I mean, if someone was willing to cooperate." Professor Vextar's eyes widened as he realized what she was suggesting. "You're proposing that she voluntarily participate in medical research?" That would require an unprecedented level of trust and communication. She's already communicating, Hana pointed out. She's already showing trust, look at her. Indeed, Nuri had relaxed completely. She was lying on her side now, her massive head resting near Hana's lap. The fear aura that had terrified the entire class was completely gone, replaced by something that felt almost peaceful. The mining station incident, Hana said suddenly. What if she wasn't attacking? What if she was looking for medical help? The room fell silent as everyone considered this possibility. Think about it, Hana continued. She's hurt, she's alone, she finds a place with people and advanced technology. Maybe she was trying to get help, and when the miners saw her, they assumed she was hostile. 12 people died, the security leader said grimly. 12 people attacked something they were afraid of, Hana replied. If someone started shooting at you when you were trying to ask for help, what would you do? Nuri made a sound that was unmistakably sad. She lifted her head and looked at each person in the room, her dark star eyes full of what could only be regret. She's sorry, Hana said quietly. She never wanted to hurt anyone. Professor Vexitar was writing furiously on his tablet. This changes everything. If void stalkers are sapient beings seeking contact rather than predators seeking prey, then our entire approach to them has been wrong. What does this mean for her? Hana asked. For Nuri, she can't go back to being locked in a cage. The Academy will have to convene an emergency ethics board, the professor replied. If she's truly a sentient being seeking help rather than a dangerous animal, then her legal status changes completely. In the meantime, Professor Vextar looked around the room at the other students who were watching the conversation with fascination. In the meantime, I think we have a great deal to learn from each other. Nuri made another series of musical sounds, longer and more complex this time. It sounded almost like she was asking a question. I think she wants to know if she can stay, Hana said. If she can be part of this instead of just a subject being studied. The first Void Stalker student at Galactic Academy, Kai said in amazement. They're going to rewrite the history books. Hana looked down at Nuri, who was watching, her with those impossible eyes. Would you like that? Would you like to learn about us while we learn about you? Nuri's response was unmistakable. She pressed her massive head against Hana's shoulder in what could only be described as a hug. For the first time since the class had begun, Professor Vextar smiled. I believe, students, that this is going to be a very interesting semester. 6 months had passed since the day that changed everything at Galactic Academy. Hana walked through the corridors toward her morning xenobiology class, but these weren't the same corridors she had nervously navigated as a new student. The Academy had grown and changed, adding new sections and facilities to accommodate its most unusual student. Beside her, Nuri glided silently along the wider passages that had been installed throughout the station. The Void Stalker had learned to control her phase-shifting ability, using it only when necessary and always with warning to those around her. She wore a translation device that converted her musical language into universal standard, though she and Hana had developed their own way of communicating that often didn't need words. Morning exam today, Hana said as they approached the classroom. Are you ready? Ready as one can be for Professor Vexitar's challenges, Nuri replied through her translator. Her voice came out in crisp universal standard, but Hana could hear the musical undertones of her real speech beneath it. The classroom they entered was completely different from the one where they had first met. Gone was the separation between students and specimens, replaced by an open space where beings from dozens of species worked together on research projects. The transparent barriers and containment fields had been replaced by collaborative workstations and communication arrays. Professor Vexitar stood at the front of the room, his scales a healthy green that indicated satisfaction. Students, today, we will be conducting our final practical examination for the semester. As you know, this class has been unique in the history of xenobiology. Laughter rippled through the room. The class had indeed been unique. Word of Nuri's integration had spread throughout the galaxy, bringing students and researchers from hundreds of worlds to study the new model of interspecies cooperation that Galactic Academy was pioneering. Your examination today will demonstrate Not just your knowledge of alien biology, but your ability to communicate and work with species different from your own. Professor Vextar continued. You will be working in mixed groups to solve a practical problem. Hana found herself paired with Kai, two Jakari crystal beings named Resonance and Harmony, and a Saurian student called Sharp Eye. Together with Nuri, they made an unusual group. But that was normal now. Your challenge, Professor Vextar announced, is to develop a communication protocol for a newly discovered species. The singing stones of Andromeda 7 have been found to be sapient, but their form of communication is completely unlike anything we have encountered before. He activated a hologram showing crystalline formations that pulsed with different colors and tones. They communicate through harmonic resonance patterns that change based on mineral composition, electromagnetic fields, and quantum fluctuations. Your task is to develop a way for them to join the galactic community. Fascinating, Resonance chimed, her crystal body flickering with excitement. The harmonics are similar to our own communication methods, but far more complex. The electromagnetic component is what makes it truly challenging, Sharp Eye added. Most species cannot perceive or generate the necessary field variations. Hana studied the hologram, watching the patterns of light and sound. There was something familiar about the way the colors shifted and flowed, but she couldn't quite place it. Nuri, what do you think? She asked. The Void Stalker examined the display with her dark star eyes. Their patterns, they remind me of the deep songs of my people. The sounds we make when traveling between worlds, when space itself listens. Deep songs? Kai asked. The musical patterns Void Stalkers use for long-distance communication across the void, Professor Vextar explained. We discovered their existence 3 months ago during our ongoing research collaboration. They appear to use quantum entanglement to maintain contact across vast distances. Hana's eyes widened as understanding hit her. The singing stones aren't just trying to communicate with us. They're already communicating with someone else. What do you mean? Harmony asked, her crystal form chiming softly. Look at the patterns again. They're not random. They're responses. The singing stones are having a conversation, but we're only hearing one side of it. Nuri made a sound of agreement. Yes, I hear it now. The harmonics have gaps, spaces where other voices should be. But who could they be talking to? Sharp Eye wondered. The answer came to all of them at the same time. Other crystal formations, Resonance said, not just on Andromeda 7, but throughout that system, perhaps throughout that entire region of space. A network, Kai breathed. They're part of a massive communication network of crystal beings. Professor Vextar, who had been listening from across the room, approached their group. Explain your theory. Hana stood up, her excitement growing. What if the singing stones aren't individuals at all, but part of a collective consciousness? The patterns we're seeing are their attempts to include us in a conversation that spans multiple worlds. That would explain why their communication seems so complex, Sharp Eye added. They're not just talking to us, they're translating between us and dozens of other crystalline minds. The harmonic variations could be different voices in the network, Harmony suggested. Each world's stones contributing their own perspective to the conversation. Nuri's translator crackled as she made a series of complex sounds. My people know of such networks. In the deep void between galaxies, there are songs that connect distant places. Perhaps these stone singers are part of something vast and ancient. Professor Vextar's scales had shifted to a deep blue-green, the color of intense intellectual excitement in Saurians. This is extraordinary work. You've just proposed a completely new model for how this species might function. How would you test this hypothesis? We need to listen to the full conversation, Hana said. Not just the stones on Andromeda 7, but others throughout the system. If we can map the communication network, we might be able to understand their language. And, if we can understand their language, we can introduce ourselves properly, Kai added. More than that, Nuri said quietly. If they are truly a network consciousness spanning multiple worlds, then bringing them into the galactic community means bringing in an entire star system as a single member species. The implications hit everyone at once. This wouldn't just be first contact with a new species. It would be first contact with a completely new form of consciousness. Class dismissed, Professor Vexitar announced suddenly. Group 7, please remain behind. I believe we need to make some urgent calls to the Academy Board. As the other students filed out, chattering excitedly about the day's revelations, Hana found herself surrounded by her unlikely team of friends. 6 months ago, most of them would never have worked together. The crystal beings had considered biological species too chaotic, the Saurians had thought humans were too emotional, and everyone had been terrified of void stalkers. Now they were about to propose one of the most ambitious communication projects in galactic history. You know, Kai said as they waited for Professor Vextar to finish his communications with the Academy Board. When I first met you, I thought you were just lucky. Right place, right time, accidentally making friends with the scariest creature in the galaxy. And now? Hana asked. Now I think maybe humans have been approaching this whole galactic community thing differently from the beginning. You don't see other species as aliens or specimens or challenges to overcome. You see them as people who might want to be friends. Nuri made her purring sound and gently touched Hana's shoulder with one claw. It is a gift, this way of seeing. Not all species possess it. Everyone possesses it, Hana disagreed. Some just need more practice using it. Professor Vextar returned, his scales bright with excitement. The Academy Board has approved a full research expedition to Andromeda. 7. They want our group to lead the communication attempts. All of us? Harmony asked. All of you. It seems that the most effective xenobiology team in Academy history is also the most diverse one ever assembled. As they left the classroom together, human, void stalker, saurian, and crystalline beings, walking side by side, Hana reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy had always been vast and full of wonders, but now it felt full of friends she just hadn't met yet. Through the Academy's great windows, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere among them, the singing stones waited to share their vast network of consciousness with anyone willing to listen. The universe had just gotten a lot more interesting.